Hey, everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host, Mike, and with me, as always, is Evan.
The only thing growing in this community today is grudges, and the book of grudges is long.
Oh my goodness, yes, lots and lots of grudges. We've been going through our different army reviews for a while, slowly making our way through the books. Again, we promised the community we are going to get through all of the rule books, and today we're going to focus on the dwarves, one of the most beloved, if not much. It's hard to say which is the most favorite faction all of Old World, but I know that dwarves are definitely up there. They are one of the most popular.
Absolutely, and a lot of people that like them and play them, it's like their main thing, their favorite thing. You know,
Hmm.
it's an
Yeah.
identity defining faction to play for sure.
And definitely dwarfs are amazing. And the more Gimli quotes you can say during your match, the more fun you and your opponent will have as well. Or is it how many pints you can drink while playing the match? I'm not sure which one it is. Maybe it's both of them together. But either way, let's dive into the review. Let's talk everything about dwarves.
Yeah, so just real fast, we're going to do it the same format we've been doing recently. So we have a part one today where we're going to cover basically like the characters. And again, that's very often kind of half of your army's points, so it's worth spending a lot of time to go through the different customizations and the different character builds that are interesting and exciting that are in the faction. And then the part
Mhm.
two will cover what does the rest of the army look like, and what are these units and rank and file troops and the rare units and the artillery that you're going to take that complement those characters or that they're supporting. Although it's kind of funny is dwarves are maybe one of the main factions in the game where it really goes the other way around. You pick your units first, and then you buy the characters necessary to help those units succeed, and that's very different than playing high elves or empire or something like that, where you're often picking the characters first because you just need certain bodies, you need certain wizards or certain monsters on the table.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point. I think part of that is because they don't have a monster focus and they don't typically have a single character that you're beefing up to the nth degree on top of a monster, writing out on his own. Almost all the dwarf characters are parts of units or supporting units, or you're making very powerful combinations. So I think there is just a fundamentally different synergy in style, right? Versus, oh, I'm taking a high elf and or chaos and I'm putting the guy on a dragon. Dwarves aren't doing that, right? Dwarves are like, or how durable they can be, how tough they could be, how impenetrable can they make that gun line or that list, or how many cannons or war machines can they get effectively to tear apart their opponents before they get to them. So it is very different. You're very right, Evan, from a lot of the other compositions that way.
Yes, and some of the builds you're going to take on those characters is dependent upon the kind of unit they're going to join. So, for, a good example of this is like if you want to have a unit of correlers that's more effective, then maybe you put a runesmith in there to give them forge fire for extra armor bane. That's an
Hmm.
example of that you're going to pick a character based on the unit that you already want to have and trying to make that unit a little bit better. And then the runes that you're going to pick on that character are very often also to help supplement, or the people that they're joining. In particular, the BSB with his, banner runes that he's buying. It's almost exclusively about what can I do. Ask not what these runes can do for me, but ask what my runes can do for my unit, and that's what they're trying to do. And the king
Yeah, I
is
think
a
that's a great way to look at it. Yeah,
yeah,
I
and
love that.
then the center of a lot of these armies is the king, who is buying the runes necessary for him to be able to handle the biggest, scariest stuff in the game, so
Hmm.
that his unit is not vulnerable to, let's say, dragons or monsters or things like that, because the king's there and he's going to deal with it himself.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting way that it's really about those combos, right? And far more than most of the other army lists, where it's about how powerful you can make the character. This is about how the character can add this synergy to the units, which I love about dwarves. But so anyway, let's dive in, starting with our grand army composition. What are we looking at there, Evan?
So for characters, we have 0 to 1 King, Anvil of Doom, or Rune Lord per 1,000 points. So we have kind of that
Hmm.
like Lord level character. What's interesting here is that the Anvil of Doom is actually a character, and it takes up one of your 0 to 1 slots. So if you wanted to
Hmm.
have two anvils, you couldn't have a king or rune lord, and if you wanted to have a king and a rune lord, you then couldn't have an anvil at least 2,000 points, and that's a bit tricky because in a lot of armies you may have really wanted to be able to do that, but in this particular army that's limited. And some of the most powerful
Yeah.
armies in the game have a little bit less of this restriction because, for example, Bretonia has 0 to 1 Duke, and it's a total separate limit from the Barons and Prophetesses, which are in a separate
Hmm.
kind of category. And similar with Wars Chaos, where there's 0 to 1 of the Chaos Lord, and then you have these other kind of pool of wizards and things to have. So you could have one Chaos Lord and two level 4 wizards alongside him. But I
Yeah.
think this is a much more balanced way to do it, personally, and I think that the limitations of Bretonia, specifically Bretonia and the Wars of Chaos, are a bit too liberal in my mind.
Yeah,
So,
maybe they are, and I think, Evan, to your point, you would I think the initial thought is, "Oh, it's the Anvil of Doom, it's a war machine. Oh, that should be in the rare slot or something like that," but it's in this slot. Now, the reality is the Anvil of Doom really is, an incredibly powerful wizard,
yeah,
for the dwarves, mechanically, for all intents and purposes. So, even though the first instinct might be, "Really? Why is it here in this character slot? Shouldn't that be in the rare slot, and I could take him with 2 low-level characters?" Well, he really is your level 4 wizard for all intents and purposes, how he plays out on the battlefield. Of course, he's durable as all heck, and such. And he's incredibly cool being on an Anvil of Doom of all
yeah.
things. So I think that's why we see him in that character slot, even though there might be a reason like, oh, maybe be in the other slot. It actually, to Evan's point, I think the Dwarf book is actually a very well balanced book. It is a very competitive list. At the same time, it also doesn't feel overpowering, overwhelming. I think it's one of the books they got the balance both internally and amongst all the other books. Really, it's one of the strongest balanced
Yeah,
books in my
really
opinion.
the only system that is very difficult to buy into is trying to make a very Slayer focused list. To start with, the Slayers can't be your general, so that's a problem. You can't really have a Demon Slayer be your general and then have a bunch of Slayers in core. That's kind of annoying. You can't have a
Yep.
Slayer BSB. That's not really a thing. And then the Slayers that you can take as regular units, and even the Slayer axe throwing from the Arcane Journal, that unit, it's not necessarily very durable when that's kind of your army's main thing, especially when you're slow. So I think that that's really the only side that I feel is difficult to make work in the dwarves.
It's
But there's
underrepresented. They
yeah,
really needed a few more things for that to really be a standalone list.
yeah, and maybe there will be a standalone list at some point that addresses that by being like, look, if you want to make a full Slayer list, you can get all these buffs, but then you have to have a more limited unit selection, and maybe we'll
Yeah.
see that. But just to go into this a little bit more, right? So we have the characters here. We're going to go through the characters individually. But I just want to go over and make sure people know we're not trying to tell you exactly what the most competitive combination of units is, because you can get that everywhere else, and you can get that by just looking at the army list that win tournaments. You can just go pull up the
Mhm.
army list and go, wow, guess that's cool. And you can just copy it and then make it and then play it at an event. What we're trying to do is dive into the units on what they actually do and how interesting that is, and how you can try to make an army that's plays the way you want it to instead of just copying some other internet net list. And that's something that I think Warhammer, and specifically Old World, is meant to do, is to say, don't you want to make your own thing and play it that way?
Yeah. And sometimes though, it is also totally cool. And a lot of people start where, especially if you're new to the game or you're new to list building, it can be intimidating, right? So going on net list is a great starting point, right? Like, okay, I know this is fairly competitive. I don't really know what it all does, but I could start from here. But I think to Evan's point, that's where really, I think the truest thing that we see in Old World that the other games that GW have or have right now don't really have is the customization. It's the ability both from the rules standpoint, the character customization, the unit customization, the standpoint, everything from the banners they're carrying to how many ranks they have. There's so many just fun choices that when you put that army on the tabletop, it is your army, right? And that's what makes it fun. So starting with that list is a totally great place to start. But we bet you sooner rather than later, and probably a lot quicker than you think, you're going to want to start tweaking things. You're going to want to start adjusting things. And yeah, it might be not the most competitive, but I promise you, you're going to have more fun making it your list and competing with that.
All right, so just to point out two more things that are related to your character. So if your general is a king, you can have a unit of Longbeards as core, and you can't do that otherwise. So if you wanted to run two Anvils of Doom instead, you wouldn't be able to have a Longbeards as a core unit. And
Hmm.
then if you have a king or Thane, you can have one unit of hammers per each of those. Now, running MSU Elite Infantry is just really hard to make work, so it's not like you want to have a ton of units of hammers, but at the very least it says you have to have at least one of either of those two guys for you to bring that hammer unit. And so that's why,
Hmm.
and very often most Grand Army lists are going to have a king or a Thane as their general. At small points values, maybe it's a Thane, right? And we're going to dive into exactly why. So, Dwarf Lords. There's two. We don't get three like Bretonia or Chaos. There's just two levels, but
Yep.
you have some stuff here that's going to make it seem like the Dwarf Lord can fight above his weight. So, what
Hmm.
the Dwarf King gives you is he's very high weapon skill 7. That's basically as high as it gets. The only way to get
Yep.
higher
Pretty
weapon skill than
much.
that is to be like a Shadow Dancer or the Bloodthirster,
Or a
right?
bloodthirster, but
Yeah.
that's about it. 7 is pretty much for a base stat line for weapon skill. pretty much as high as it's going to get. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're an infantry character, being toughness 5, really, really great because very often, if you don't have a lot of mount options, that's just going to stay at whatever number that is. So, an elf character, if they're on foot, they don't have a mount, they're toughness 3. That's yikes.
Yeah,
And
five
king is just,
five is fantastic for being on foot. Very few things in the game are going to have that.
yeah. And then the 4 attacks is at that breakpoint, I find, for being good enough to
Hmm.
invest points in your weapon. If you have 3 attacks, like the Empire General, buying an Ogre Blade for the Empire General is a terrible idea because he doesn't have enough output to make that really matter. It's like so many points to
Yeah.
buy this weapon that he just can't reuse.
Hmm.
So 4 is the breakpoint there, and then leadership 10, which is as good as it gets. And guess what? This whole character is only 125 points. That's a bit cheaper than somebody like an Elf Prince, or a Chaos Lord. So he's
It
interesting.
is.
Yeah,
But keep in mind, a big part of why he's cheaper is that movement 3. So that's
yeah.
something you get to see throughout the whole army. They dwarves are right very dangerous over short distances. You see, there's one. But you movement 3 is their starting point. There are definitely ways to make the dwarves really fast. From your Anvil of Doom, from the cart in the Arcane Journal, there are definitely different ways to do it. But the starting point, unless you build combos to make your dwarves go very fast, they're going to be the slowest army on the tabletop out of the gates.
Yes. Although I think drilled is and the ability to use it in this game was a brilliant way to say, hey, dwarves can still be slow because if the dwarves are moving forward, it'd be like, well, then why are they a dwarf? But
Hmm.
if you have drilled on literally everything, that gives you a lot of movability options, and you have a lot of kind of organization, right? And so
Hmm.
that can
Hmm.
get you either across the field faster with marching column, or to be able to just move with overruns, or to avoid certain units that are in your way. So there's a lot of things you can do with drill to make up for your speed. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they have the most drilled entries of
oh
any
yeah,
army
oh
out
yeah.
there. I'm pretty sure they do, and if not,
It's
they are
every
right up
single
there.
infantry unit except slayers and rangers, I think.
Yeah, it's very pervasive in a very good way. So again, even though it starts at 3, right? If you're using drilled, even if you had no other buffs or benefits, that's still 9, which is still actually faster than a typical infantry that would be marching 8.
So something else to point out here that we're going to get to when we talk about the runes, but something they changed in this edition that wasn't in 8th edition is that you can buy a great weapon and put runes on the great weapon and still keep all of the stats that the great weapon started with. So you still have the strength
Hmm.
and the AP from the great weapon, and then just buy runes on top of that. Um,
Hmm.
that is not how it used to work. It used to basically just have a hand weapon
Nope.
and then buy all of the runes from a hand weapon up to whatever weapon you wanted, and it often ended up being that like other factions would have a 60 70 point magic sword that'd be really good, and you would have to spend like 100 dwarf rune points just to turn your hand weapon into something halfway decent, and that's no longer the case. So that's really cool because I much prefer the idea that my characters can actually do damage as opposed to my characters just sitting there never dying. Like I want them to kill
Yeah.
stuff.
Starting with that +2 strength, 2 AP, because you're probably going to go last anyway. You might as well, when you hit back, you're going to hit as hard as you can, and you definitely can have dwarf lords hit back really hard.
And then the other option is that you can either have the crossbow or the handgun, which can now, with the Arcane Journal, have a whole bunch of runes on them as well, and so then you can make a very
Hmm.
shooty person. So tends to be that in almost every dwarf list, or at least Grand Army, you have the king because he's very strong and very combat focused, and you have a
Hmm.
Thane who's your BSB because it provides a lot of great support, and then kind of alleviates the need for the king to potentially buy any defensive items if the
Hmm.
Thane is doing it instead. And then potentially you have a second Thane because the Thane and the King very uniquely have more points of magic items that they could purchase, or runes in this case, than other
Hmm.
characters of their class. Most
Hmm.
characters that are like a king will have 100 points, and then the hero level has 50. And in particular, 50 points for the hero is not very much. And there's a lot of items that are
No.
like 55, 60 points that you can't get. But a king can have 125 points of runes, and the Thane can have 75. That is a big
Yeah.
advantage, and it gets even bigger when you play Royal Host and you get another 25 points on top of that.
Yeah,
Oh
it's
boy.
pretty huge. And the Thane only starting at 60 points, I think definitely helps with that. I mean, starting at only 60 points, you still have weapon skill 6, you still have toughness 5, you only have 2 wounds. That was one of the big challenges, but you still have leadership 9. So again, you can create some really great specialized combos with those Thanes because of that additional rune cap, and still make the price point not totally manageable, as long as you're not getting greedy and trying to buy every rune. If you're specializing the Thanes, this Thane is going to do this thing really well. You can be pretty points effective on it.
So then we have to talk about, when we're going to get to the mounts in a bit, but the fact that you're on foot, or you're infantry at the very least, isn't that big of a deal when
Hmm.
you have shield bearers, because it gives you those 3 extra wounds, and now you have the number of wounds like, you have more wounds with that than, for example, in High Elf on a Griffin. It's about the same number, gives you
Hmm.
the extra 3. So having shield bearers gives you the wounds necessary to be able to tank damage, and even if you don't have stomp
Yes.
attacks, you do have the 3 guys, who have weapon skill 5, so they can make some decent attacks that
Hmm.
you're hanging out with. Um, and then the other things to notice here is we got some special rules. So the king and the thane. This one is interesting. They have ancestral grudge, which gives them hatred
Hmm.
against enemy characters. And if they're
Ooh.
in hammers or long blades, they get it the rule too. This is really cool. And you know who doesn't have this rule is the demon slayer. And I recently had quite the bad situation where I had a demon slayer, all kitted
Okay.
up with 6 attacks, and he
Ooh.
charges a bloodthirster. Demon
Ooh.
slayer, bloodthirster, and
He's
he got to
still a
go.
bloodthirster. He's
Yeah,
still a
okay, but
bloodthirster.
hold on. But he is in narrative designed to kill this, or at least to try to fight it, right?
Or to try to fight it and die while fighting
Yeah,
it.
and that's what I want to have happen. But what that didn't happen. What happened instead was, because he was a demon slayer and not a dwarf lord, he swung his 6 attacks, because I gave him 6 attacks, and
That's a lot.
he struck at initiative, so he actually went before the bloodthirster, and he missed with all of them because the bloodthirster's weapon skill 10. And I was like, hey, wait a second. I thought dwarves can like reroll to hit, and no, it's only the king and the thane that can do that. So if he was just a king, he would have had a better shot at fighting a bloodthirster than the actual demon slayer man himself.
Well, there's a reason why the king is the king, because he is a badass.
I think the demon slayers should have hatred, and I'm not going to apologize for that. Anyway, um,
You make a valid point.
so we also have like Grommel armor, which lets you reroll ones in your armor saves. Grommel weapons, which means if you have the hand weapon, you have AP1. Like,
Hmm.
now again, the Grommel weapons goes away if you take any weapon runes. But hey, like at the very least, that means if you want to build incredibly durable, like nothing will hurt me type thing, or
You
king,
can.
you can have just your Grommel hand weapon, full plate, shield bearers, extra armor runes, extra ward saves, extra everything, and be like, I can hit you with my hand weapon, and in the meantime, you're not doing anything to me. That's pretty
Yep.
strong. That's pretty strong.
Hmm. Pretty cool.
All right, so let's keep going. And one more thing, they do have stubborn, which is very cool because if you ever run them alone and you like lose combat by a bunch, you're like, oh, thank God, I've got stubborn.
And
So
magic resistance one. I know it's small, but it
yeah,
does help.
well, it helps when your highest dispel is a +3. If at the very least everything in your army has MR1, that means that hopefully if anyone targets you with Plague or Rust or something, you have the same kind of +4 against it that you might normally
That's
have.
right. Hmm.
Okay, so then here we're going to talk about the mounts. I guess that happens before the other characters. So the Oathstone, um, it's always been a bit weird. Like it's about the challenges and sitting there and throwing. It's kind of like the Gauntlet from Batonia, but it costs more. So if you
Hmm.
issue the challenge, it can't be refused. They automatically pass panic tests, and they can't flee as a charge reaction. So I kind of want more from that. I don't see this taken very much, especially because if you take this, you can't have shield
No.
bearers. It's
Yep.
and the Gauntlet of the Duel, which is the challenge part, that's like 5 points in a Bretonnia character. So
Hmm.
that means the 10 points has to come from that whole panic thing. And if you're dwarves, you have really high leadership anyway. So I don't know if you need that.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference, my problem with the Oath Stone is, and you can't refuse, but the reality is the dwarves, by default, again, you can make some fast dwarves, but generally speaking, the dwarves are the slowest army. So if your opponent doesn't want to engage with your dwarf character as the Oath Stone, he's typically just going to run away from you, and there's typically nothing you can do about it. So that's my problem with the Oath Stone is fundamentally is a flawed system because of that juxtaposition of they know I have it. They know they can't get away from me if they engage with me, so they're just not going to run into me. And suddenly it's an item that discourages engagement with the enemy rather than encouraging engagement or creating other interesting ways. Or again, or if the big chaos lord on the dragon is charging you, he does want to attack you, or right, or he's by himself anyway, so he couldn't have refused you anyway in that situation. So I think it's very thematic. I think it's fun. I think it's very dwarf-like. I'm not convinced that the way the rules are written for it, the mechanics play out the way in a fun, compelling way. I think that might be a second pass to this that could make it more interesting.
Definitely have to see it. I'm not sure exactly what it did before, but it's definitely not as exciting as it used to be. Because I know it used to
No.
actually show up occasionally. Um,
Hmm.
Like by comparison, the Thorgrim Grudgebearer, like being able to just put down some kind of a stone, then makes his unit unable to move, including like and unbreakable. So just they're just stuck there
Hmm.
now. That's a thing that's more useful and interesting than this because it has a way to be run, right? It has a way to do something.
Yep.
And then you
Yep.
have shield bearers who are just a very good mount that I kind of wish that Skaven had because they used to have something called the War Litter, which is basically the exact same thing as this but with Stormvermin, and we have three dwarfs who are holding up a shield with the dwarf lord on
Yep.
top. The one I
Looks
have
great.
is it's actually like they're holding like a giant table kind of thing where they can kind of just set it down and it has four long legs and they can fight underneath it. So they don't
I
have to.
love it. I've seen so many versions. I've seen
Yeah,
tables, I've seen thrones, I've seen shields, I've seen mini Viking boats. I've seen kegs. So many cool things the dwarfs have done. But this is a great mount, and you know what makes your dwarf king look even more badass is having him carried aloft on top of shields or some other cool thing. So I encourage all the dwarf lords out there to bring this because it's just cool. Bonus points beyond being amazing and cool is it's actually really effective.
yeah. So for the frontage of two regular dwarves, you still have your character, right? So it only eats up
Mhm.
one extra slot, but you get three dwarves worth of attacks. So it's kind of like
Yeah.
having three extra dwarves in your front line, or
Hmm.
two extra dwarves in your front line than you normally would if you had an infantry guy. So
Hmm.
pretty much every character who can buy one of these very often does because the extra
Hmm.
wounds is really good and the extra attacks is really good. So like, what else do you want? And you're still infantry, so you can still run around in a skirmish formation if you want to be solo and you can still shoot in 360 degrees, right? So
Hmm.
yeah,
It's great. Yeah, there's almost no, I mean, honestly, unless you're trying to shave off some points, there's no reason not to take it. It's just fantastic.
yeah. And the fact that it's just combining all of your defensive profile with the extra wounds is very very good.
Yep, there's
Um,
no downside.
yeah. Okay, so Anvil of Doom, very critical piece here because in a lot of armies, this is kind of your linchpin caster because it's
Hmm.
as much as close of a dwarf as they're going to get to a wizard. They have bound spells. They're power level 3. It has very high magic resistance. It's unbreakable, and it's also able to buy runes, which it doesn't really need to be like running into combat and fighting people. So that people what people tend to do is buy like defensive runes for this guy and make him incredibly hard to get rid of. So in the meantime,
Hmm.
he's just very hard to get rid of while he's sitting there shooting you with magic missiles or buffing up the dwarves and making them run around, and all the
Hmm.
while not giving up victory points because he doesn't die because he's so hard to kill.
Yep. Hmm.
So
Yep.
that's an interesting way to take it. I do think though that if you max out on defensive runes on this thing, it does get up to 335 points, which is a lot more
Ooh,
than most people spend on just a level 4 wizard.
getting pricey.
And you basically have to, if you do that, rely on the fact that he's so unkillable that people will waste time sending units trying to hurt you and will fail.
Yeah, he really can turn into what the 40K players would call a distraction carnifex, when you're building it that way. And if it causes a distraction and gets someone to waste a whole bunch of expensive points or a character chasing him and never tearing it down, then it was totally worth it. But the veteran players will know what the distraction carnifex is or the distraction anvil of doom is, and they just will ignore it and they'll just go after the rest of the stuff. And don't get me wrong, even when it's casting its spells, it's going to be effective. It's a great piece, but again, it could also get dispelled, right, by the enemy wizards or whatever. So again, to Evan's point, you start getting into that 330 plus points range for this unit. If it's just a level 4 caster, if the distraction isn't working, you've invested a ton of points, and it's going to be hard for this thing to make those points back.
So it depends because it's very, very good at buffing one Death Star unit. So if you bring one unit of Longbeard's Hammers or something, and you put all your characters in it, and you just want that one unit to go absolute bananas, then buying this thing and making it. Because again, if you just have that one Death Star unit, well, now there's not as many units to defend an anvil. So if the anvil's sitting out
Hmm.
in the open, able to be charged, able to be flanked, able to be run up to by whatever is out there, because there aren't other little units guarding it, then the anvil has to be durable enough on its own. So it kind of quadruples down on this build of one incredibly durable and buffed dwarf unit, and then a very
Yep.
expensive anvil that's just sitting there just trying to help it out. So it's almost like having a wizard in a unit, making that unit an even
Hmm.
bigger Death Star. It's just that it's next to
Yep.
it instead of being inside.
And that can be super effective. Again, if you're going to an event or a tournament where it's primarily based upon kill points, points denial is a totally valid strategy that you can do. And this is a great way to do that. But I have a feeling the future of Old World is going to have a lot more objectives and a lot more
Yeah.
objective play. And having a single, very pricey or very small MSU army with or not MSU, but these Death Star units, again, great for killing and points denial. I'm not convinced it's going to work out once we start seeing more objective based scenarios, which a lot of communities such as our own has already started to shift towards more objective based scenarios. And I bet you anything that GW Match Playbook is going to have a lot more of that too. So again, it's a strategy that's totally valid and effective in the normal default. But I bet you as the meta and the game starts evolving more towards objective based scenarios, I think that way of playing is going to become less relevant and less seen on the table.
So we'll have to go through. I believe rune lore. So it's here. Okay, so here's the different essentially spells that it casts. Now there's one thing to
Mhm.
be clear on it. It's not able to cast both enchantments in the same turn. So even though it has 4 spells, it can only ever cast 3 of them. Because it's only allowed to cast 1 spell per phase, if I remember correctly. So we have
Mhm.
2 options for the enchantment phase. You either do Rune of Oath and Steel, which gives basically just better armor saves, improves and depending on what you cast on, you either get to uh, essentially reroll the armor save rolls or improve the armor save by 1 and reroll. Now the second part is even better, right? But that's very good. And it is just 1 unit. So again, here's the first example of essentially double down on making 1 unit incredibly hard to deal with. If you have Longbeards with heavy armor, shield, and they have a re-rollable 3+ armor save, even if you have pretty high AP, that is very, very strong. And a lot of those units, not necessarily Longbeards, but a lot of them can re-roll ones on their armor save anyway. So
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons why I don't love this as much, because a lot of the units that I like to take would already get that. Um, then we see Rune of Hearth and Home. That's the other option. And every dwarf unit within 21 inches, it's immune to psychology. So here's the problem with that. You don't really need that because you're very often leadership 9-10 because every single dwarf is leadership 9. And the
Yep.
chance of passing a leadership 9 terror check is really, really high. So that's the main reason to have immune to psychology is to be able to pass fear and terror. So usually you're
Mhm.
casting this first one and then not doing the second one.
Yep.
And then during the conveyance move spell, you basically have arcane urgency, but it's longer range, 24 inches, and you can just move twice. That's one of the key factors to be able to make one specific dwarf unit, for example, one that has a whole bunch of characters in it, be able to actually run around the
Mhm.
battlefield. And what I find is that when you have an anvil and you have a dwarf Death Star and you have all your characters in it, you basically just have a level 4 battle magic wizard with lore familiar and a dragon, because that's what it is. You have a really durable Death Star that's moving all over the table, and you have
Mhm.
basically a guy who has Fireball and Arcane Urgency. That's basically what you got,
Yep.
and I don't find that kind of play. It's very strong in the competitive scene. I don't find it very exciting. Um, that's not super interesting to me. I think the battle magic is good in the way that makes it not super like jazzy for me.
Yeah. And I think to your point, again, we have seen this list, that version of the list, more prevalent for the last several months, but it's starting to become less and less seen, at least in our local community. It is very effective. Like I said, it is dwarves running at you in your face, screaming, charging you turn two is with a Death Star unit is really good, and it's also points denial. It's good luck killing that unit or getting it down where you score any points off of it. Incredibly hard to do, and that anvil they'll typically make T10 or whatever combo they're going to be doing with it. So again, it is an aggressive points denial Death Star list, which can be very effective in meta. But typically, you'll find that those lists, once they hit the top tables, if they win their games, they're winning by 100 points, right? 200 points, they're winning
Yeah,
by a very small
slim.
percentage. But again, as soon as we started seeing objective play, they're now losing those games, and it's very easy to flip. And again, to your point, it can be really, if someone doesn't know what's about to happen, it's shock and awe and really exciting and amazing. But the
Yeah,
reality is, once you learn how, oh, this is what this list does, it's pretty easy to play around it for those experienced players. And which is why I think we're seeing it less and less. It caught people off guard at first. Now that the veteran players know how to handle it, oh, I put a scout in the way. Oh, I redirect you with this. Oh, I do
and
that,
what you're
right?
referring
And then,
to is the build where you have that single Death Star unit with the characters in it. They're in marching column in
yeah.
the beginning of the game. They're able to march 12 inches because they have a cart to give them +1 inch to their move. and then they're
Yep.
able to arc energy with, I'm going to call it that, right? But it's Rune of Haste and Urgency, and they're going to move twice, and they're going to go 12
Yep.
more the second time, and they already vanguarded 3 inches. So you are spending 335 points on the anvil. Then you're spending like 80 points on the cart. Then you're spending 25 points on that Vanguard rune. And all of those points, in some ways, are just to make that one unit get to move the way a dragon does for free.
Hmm. Yeah, and then you'll find that's the vast majority of your army. And again, it was really fun and exciting at first, and then after a few months or a few events, you realize, oh, actually, I'm not doing a lot with my army, and it's really easy for the opposed to play around me, and I don't have that shooting, I don't have those other units. It feels very flat and very one dimensional. So, which is why
Right.
I think we saw a whole bunch of it at first. It was exciting when it caught people off guard. Now that people know how to play with it, people are getting bored with it. We're seeing
Yeah.
this less and less in our
And that's why
community
we're
as
going to mention it, and then we're going
yeah.
to talk about the other ways to play the dwarves that aren't just that one note way. Because again, it's not just that. You also have to have a runesmith who's rocking as many of the automatic dispel items as he can take. Because if that unit runs towards something and the enemy has illusion magic, they're going to be outside of the range of your anvil, no matter what, and they're going to cast
Mhm.
all of the different spells that illusion can do to make that unit that you just ran 24 inches at you not be able to charge. So you have to take a whole bunch of automatic dispel items and then burn all of them on turn 2 or turn 1 just to
Some
be
yeah,
able to
depending on
play
whether
the
you go first
game.
or second.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
think
alright,
that,
so let's move on
yeah.
from it, though.
Yeah, and we're going to keep going. So, what are the other characters that you can play, and what builds do they focus into? So, we got runesmiths. Runesmiths are
Mhm,
great support characters. We were just talking about it. So, if you don't want to have an anvil, well, runesmiths are really important because they can be other dispellers. They can buy, like I was saying, an automatic dispel
mhm.
item. I love automatic dispel items. I play them with high elves because they're one of the other factions that get them, and the Beastmen Archangel just came out with one. So the Beastmen are now going to be able to
But they're
say,
rare. There's just not that many in the game, and they're super powerful, like, "Oh, crap, my opponent rolled a 15." Boom, auto dispel. So, I would encourage dwarf players that I to not take 5 or 6 of them, way too many points, but I'd encourage you probably don't leave home without at least 1, maybe 2 seems to be the sweet spot. Different, dwarf generals will have different opinions on that, but it is incredibly powerful for that clutch moment when there's this really powerful spell you really don't want to go off to just say boom, make it
yeah.
go away. Super powerful.
And I've been having a lot of experience using it. It's called Sigil of Asurian for high elves, and what I very often do is it's Plague of Rust, Miasma Mirage. Those are the two spells where the first time you cast that on the dragon or my big infantry unit, I say no. I stop that. That's
Mhm.
pretty much it. And those, so it's really
Yep.
easy to figure out. Sometimes I save it and I wait for something like maybe it's Spirit Leech from Necromancy. And I'm like, oh man, you're about to scream at me and you're going to Spirit Leech me first. I have to get rid of Spirit Leech, even though it's just a little bit of leadership debuff. I know how important that could be.
Yeah, but you also, correct me if I'm wrong, Evan, you do get to see what your opponent rolled first,
Yeah,
right? So that's super powerful because you're like, oh, he only rolled a 7 or an 8. I can dispel that no problem. But it's when it goes like, ooh, he rolled a 13, 14, 15. I need this to stop. Knowing that what they've already rolled is very, very another thing that makes that very powerful. You don't have to predetermine it before he rolls the dice.
it's also pretty easy after a while to learn. Wow, okay, so that specific spell that changed the whole game, and I'm gonna save this for when.
Mhm.
And you know what the other person's spells are gonna be when you start playing the game, so you can in your head start planning. Okay, he's got these 4 spells. I don't care about those 3. I just want to figure out when he casts that one spell that one time. For example, if someone's building around Spectral Doppelganger and I have an auto dispel, I'm like, heh, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Because the one time you want to get it off, I will automatically stop it.
Hmm. And it's hard to get off to begin with. So yeah, really powerful. Love that dwarfs have it. I'd encourage you to take at least 1, if not 2, when playing the game.
So, the runesmiths, though, they've got other stuff they do too. So, for one of it is
Hmm.
Forge Fire, and it gives the unit Armor Bane 2 and Flaming Attacks. Now, Flaming Attacks is a bit of a side grade, and everyone has been talked to death about it. But occasionally you have a whole unit of Thunderers, and you give them Forge Fire, and they're firing a whole bunch of bullets at a Tomb King's dragon, and it's actually going to do
Hmm.
2 wounds each time if it goes through with no regen.
Armor
So
Bane 2 is amazing. Don't get me wrong, like you still have to roll sixes, but being able exactly right for those things that have a 4-up save or a 3-up save, just 1 or 2 of your dice that you rolled happen to be a 6. It just makes the efficiency of those hits going through very effective. And again, most things in this game, it's not a high wound game, right? Dragons are the biggest, right? We're talking 8 wounds, 9 wounds, 10 wounds, or whatever. So you just two more wounds going through makes a huge difference.
Well, that's interesting. He can ride over Oathstone. See, I never seen anyone do that, but he can take it. That's interesting. I don't know why he would ever do that.
I don't. I think that's the reason why. Also, magic resistance too,
Yeah,
out of the gate
so it
with the
bumps your
with
magic resistance
characters.
up. That's great.
hmm So also very, very helpful. And of course, you're still going to get stubborn, all those other things. So again, very cost effective. I think they're great. And again, you still get magic resistance too, whether it's a rune lord or a rune smith, right? It's not
Yeah,
separating out those special rules. So there are definitely combos here where typically with your army, you would never consider taking a level one wizard, or often you would never consider taking a level two wizards, kind of like level four wizards or go home, the way the game is balanced right now. But I love with the dwarf runesmiths that you absolutely can take this rune lord or rune smith, which effectively are the equivalent of level one or level two wizards, and they are definitely effective at combining them. Again, there's just a lot more fun combinations and synergies you can do, such as with the ranged attacks that everyone was just talking about. So they're a lot more than just a dispel machine. They can also do other fun things for your army.
and they also have the 75 and 125 points of magic items, so that helps a
hmm
lot. And they can, unlike a lot of other wizards, they've got full plate armor and shield if you want to just try to go as much defense as possible. And you have the reroll ones in
hmm
your armor saves, and you have the AP one on your hand weapon. So full plate, shield, that's just mundane equipment. That's like 5 points there, so you're at 70 points for a runesmith with that. And then you can either buy, three, rune of dispelling automatically, whatever it's called, or you could buy some
hmm
other stuff, and you get to give your unit forge fire, which is cool, and the extra magic resistance. So it's a very much a tech piece, little guy, and he's very cheap for giving your unit quite a lot of buffs that are always on. Unlike a warrior
hmm
priest, we actually have to take some kind of prayer and actually pass the test to give any kind of buff whatsoever. This guy actually gives some kind of a buff no matter what. He doesn't have to take any kind of test.
Yep.
So that's cool.
It just works. Yep.
Okay, so the Slayers. Now, I really like these guys, and I think everyone who's read any Gotrek and Felix novel will too as well, because
hmm
a dwarf slayer is a very narrative and iconic character. They're a dwarf who's been disgraced, and they're just going on the absolute warpath, and they've got basically the same stats as the king, except higher initiative. That's cool. They're also
hmm
unbreakable and immune to psychology. Rules that used to be incredibly good, and I think because of the whole fallback and Godard thing, which has really helped a lot of the other parts of the game, not as good anymore. Because, you might be unbreakable, but what if you just die, though? Especially if a dwarf demon slayer charges through like the front ranks of a bunch of graveguard, he can kill four of them, and then the remaining six guys all get to swing at him, and they can just kill him or
Yeah.
something, right?
But if he died in combat, then he fulfilled his life's destiny. So mission
Yeah.
accomplished.
So, the fact that these guys don't have the hatred versus enemy characters is a big
hmm
gotcha that just in particular happened to me. And if you look at him, he's 130 points, so he's actually more expensive than the king by just a couple points. And out of the gate, he doesn't have any like special rules that are super worth that because again, I'd rather just be stubborn and be a lot cheaper than unbreakable, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think what's going on here, Evan, is again, and they've suffered with this in the past, is they have these concepts of the slayers and like, oh, this is a troll slayer, this is a dragon slayer, this is a giant slayer, this is a demon slayer. It again, it's similar to the witch hunters in terms of the empire, where they're trying to make them really specialized. Like this version of this unit is really meant to hunt down and deal with these things. So they give them these thematic rules historically to deal with those things. But in terms of on the tabletop, you don't know who you're going to play, right? You're going to a 1 day event or a 2 day event. You're playing 3 to 5 games. You might never run into a demon in the other list or a dragon in the other list. It's totally possible. Well, you probably run into a dragon. But the point is again, this is an example where I think they went too thematic with their rules construction and their intentions, and ultimately because that makes it very contextual. Because it's so contextual, it's feel bads when you're trying to take these things of they're trying to say, well, you'll have less of these rules but more of those rules in case you come into this situation. But when you're going to an event, you don't know that you're going to that situation. We want rules that are take on all comer rules, and I think that's where the construction of the slayers, to your point, not having hatred versus everything, is where they're suffering from. I wish they made
well,
them just
and
go
if
spend more
anyone's
points. They're just more effective.
right, and some people might be shouting at the screen that in the Arcane Journal there are there are tattoos you can buy with your allotment of points to give yourself hatred versus enemy characters or reroll and hit and challenges, stuff like that. That's cool. I think I didn't spend the points on that specific upgrade because I wanted to just max out how many attacks I had and have strikes first with a great weapon. That's kind of what the build I
Mhm.
was going for. But that's just something to bring up is that then these guys they're starting out naked and they have less weapon and talisman rune slots than a king, so they have a little bit less kind of defense that they can buy themselves, right? And again, I think
Hmm.
rune of pairing, I think that's like a weapon rune. So again, if you have try to make yourself harder to hit with -1 to hit, that's going to make it so that your weapon isn't as good at actually killing people, right?
Yeah, but it
Um,
has killing blow and they have better magic resistance. So again, I think they
yeah,
they pointed it to where they thought it
yeah,
was appropriate for these other rules. And I think the main thing is just hatred versus everything, quite frankly, is one of the most powerful rules in the game, period.
yeah.
Especially because most combats only last one round. Sometimes they can last several, but they typically only last one round. And so quite frankly, replacing hatred versus everything with killing blow, 9 out of 10 times, I'd rather have hatred versus everything.
Yeah, and so Killing Blow is really cool. I completely forgot he had this. What I don't forget ever though is that they always win on the 4+ versus
Mhm.
basically anybody, right? And then they also
Mhm,
have D3 damage versus Warp Spawn or Behemoths if you're the Demon
mhm,
Slayer, and a Dragon Slayer just has
mhm,
it versus Behemoths. Now, like in the actual core books that are released, the core armies, the only Warp Spawn unit in the whole game I think is the Demon Prince. Pretty sure about that.
what
Um,
about chaos spawn? No?
they're not Warp Spawned.
No, I think you're
You know,
right,
and,
yeah.
and there's a reason for that because they were actually mortals who turned into the thing, right?
Yeah, well, so is demon prince.
That's well, it depends on the kind of. That's a good point.
No, they'll
Then yeah,
start
they
as
should
humans.
really go tell that to the Chaos Spawns. If the gigantic Chaos Spawn had Warp Spawned, I'd be very excited about this because there's so many of those in the game. And getting the D3 damage for free, okay, you know what that really makes you want to do? It makes you want to have a guy with 6 attacks who, if any of them get through, or they're all going to be D3 damage. But then what if I just miss? Which is what happened to me.
Yeah. Well, it's also hard again just to get these guys into combat. Typically they have the loner rule to start with, unless you put them in another unit with them, and they have close to zero armor most of the time. So
Yeah,
again, just
yeah.
they have the potential to have great output, but but because they're by themselves and they have so little defense, the delivery mechanism to get them where you want them to be with your less movement is really hard to do. Right. So that's part of the challenge.
Yeah, and it is possible though. You can actually do it.
It totally does happen, and when it happens, it's the most amazing thing ever, when they
Yeah,
actually pull something off. But again, I love the Slayers. I think a lot of people love the Slayers. I mean, I remember the first time seeing a dwarf with a mohawk and fiery orange hair, with his shirt torn off and runes all over himself. It was just this amazing. It's so GW, so Games Workshop, so old world. I absolutely love it. It's so iconic. In fact, they spun off those AOS armies that are inspired by Right the Slayers, which is so great. So I think they're very, very popular.
yeah.
I love seeing them on the tabletop. I don't think we see them on the tabletop a lot because the rules, it's not about the points. It's just mechanically, it is
Well,
hard to get them to do what you want them to do.
also there's kind of a bit of a feel bads here with like okay, so we have this D3 wounds thing, but why don't we have Monster Slayer? This one is literally called Slayer of Dragons, and you don't have the Monster Slayer rule.
Yeah, a little weird.
I think that if you just had Monster Slayer instead of this, I would suddenly be like, well, yeah, now I really want to run the guy who has the 6 attacks, because then all I want to do is have him hanging out somewhere, being like, if you get anywhere close to me, I'm going to charge you, and I'm just going to
Mhm.
see what happens.
Yeah,
And if I die,
yeah,
whatever. Again, the fact
yeah.
that these guys give up victory points when they die is also a little bit weird. You have to take up very expensive tattoo, which takes up some of your tattoo slot to try to make it so that you actually give up points if you don't die. But then
Mhm.
you're spending more points to potentially give up no points if you don't die, right? I kind of feel like that should just be a rule they have for free or something.
Yeah, just kind of baked into it. So again, I think they're really cool. They have a lot of potential. Hard to pull it off. I think not a total rewrite, but a couple rules tweaks,
Yeah.
I think would make them significantly more competitive or more contextually applicable more of the time, right? In which case, I think we'd see them on the tabletop a lot more.
And what you see instead is you see the Archangel unit, the Psycho Slayers with the axes, because those guys are characters.
Are
They're
they
cheap.
Doomslayers? I think.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Doomslayers. Yeah, they're characters. They're cheap. They're skirmishing. They have a whole bunch of attacks already, so you can buy them some runes, but they already have a bunch of attacks.
Yep.
You can either take them cheap or you can buy a ton of stuff for them, and they already have the inverse victory points rule baked in. So, again, I kind of would prefer it if these were like if those guys were a little more basic, but these guys were more interesting. But it's just kind of the other way right now.
Yep. Well, hopefully in the future we'll see a new Arcane Journal, and hopefully they add a Slayer list. And excited, they're going to do it at some point. I don't know that they're going to do it in this edition, but hopefully in edition two, because everybody wants to see a Slayer list. It will be amazing when it happens.
My tinfoil hat says they didn't make Slayers that good because they know a lot of people wouldn't want to buy the old metal Slayer models, so they're waiting until they make plastic guys, and then they can be like, "Hey, you ever heard of Slayers before?" And then they'll make something.
I don't know. There are loads of players who do love those classic models, but
I
again,
have
those are
them.
probably veteran players
Yeah,
versus the newer players. But yeah, so we'll
they're
see.
hard
But
to
at
paint.
the same time, the Arcane Journal for the Dwarf was one of the best, if not the best, Arcane Journal they released with a lot of creativity. So we'll see.
So, I mean, we've been talking a lot about combat, a lot about magic. Dwarfs also have a
Hmm.
ton of artillery.
Oh yes, they do.
And a lot of very custom. I know a lot of dwarf players are incredibly salty that the superior empire weapons have more damage than them and all that stuff. But you know
Oh,
what dwarves
oh,
do have?
Haggard, what are you doing? You're gonna get all the dwarf players mad at us.
You
Oh
know,
my
I
goodness.
look down upon anyone who talks bad
Uh,
about
oh,
empire.
let's move on. Let's move on.
So they have very customizable artillery. Okay, that's a great feature that a lot of people don't get. In particular, hey, you know those Bretonian Exile players who take their two bombards that are cheaper than your cannons and better than your cannons. They don't have any way to reroll those misfire dice, do they? And neither
No.
do the Ogre Iron Blaster players who bring the two Iron Blasters. They say, "Oh, these Iron Blasters are super good," and then they both blow themselves up all the time. And you know,
All day long. I think you're exactly right. That's the biggest difference. While there are other artillery in the game that have the potential for greater maximum damage output in terms of as reliable as something in the old world can be, the dwarves certainly can have some of the most, if not the most reliable war machines on the table.
yeah. So these guys have more special rules than the Empire Engineer, but they're also kind of different. It's a bit weird. Like for
Hmm.
example, the Empire Engineer can his most common role is to give a Hell Blaster Blisco 4, which they kept
Hmm.
exactly the same as what it was in previous editions. Whereas the Dwarf Engineer, he can give a unit of Quarrelers or Thunderers reroll ones to hit when they're shooting,
Hmm.
which in a lot of ways is kind of more exciting because now you can have a build that's you can have him guarding your artillery and protecting a unit of shooters and kind of building in that natural gun line. Maybe it's on a hill, maybe it's all teamed up, maybe it's on a castle wall, Mike. Hey, maybe what about that? And you have this little artillery
Maybe.
guy who's helping out people shoot better. He's also helping you entrench your artillery so you can kind of be in cover and be more protected. And he can also basically can't be shot nearby, right?
Right. Yep.
I'm
It's
sorry, does
great.
he not let you reroll your artillery dice on the cannons? Does he not have that?
Mm, there's so many rules.
He doesn't do
War
that. Oh
machine.
no, he said. I'm sorry, or
No,
reroll
right.
artillery dice. There
Or
we go.
artillery dice. I was
I was
gonna
gonna
say
say,
that doesn't make any sense. No, no, no. No, he's good.
and this is super important. So what you do when you're playing dwarves is you have your guy. He's within range of your thunderers, and he's within range of your cannon. You shoot the cannon
Hmm.
first. If the cannon doesn't misfire, cool. The thunderers get to have the benefit instead. If the cannon does misfire, you're going to be really happy you got to reroll it,
Yep.
right?
Yep. It
And
makes
he's pretty
perfect
cheap.
sense. And he's dwarf. Hmm.
He's also a guy who you can buy the handgun on, and then a couple of gun runes, and make him, your machine gun guy. He can't buy all three combos of the gun runes to make it really really good, but he does have higher blow skill to start with than the Thane, so
Hmm.
it's a bit of a trade off. I like the idea of this guy being able to shoot himself, so that's cool.
And he's only 50 points out of the gate, so well worth investment to make your army more reliable.
Okay, so now we need to go to the runes because
Let's
again,
do it.
these are essentially how you make your characters unique. Because again, there's only two mount options, and they're both not necessarily mounts. We already went through them, so that was it. That's your characters, and they're on foot. To take them with the runes, and so the runes are basically the whole shebang. This is your
So before
custodian.
we read through all the runes, let's do a quick overview for players who aren't as familiar. Most players who are watching this probably are familiar, but dwarves don't just take magic items like everybody else does, where this is just the item and here you go, and it costs this many points. They actually custom create their magic items. So they have a whole rule set here specific to the dwarf army on how to make runic magic items.
Yeah, And what's really cool about that and exciting is that you can try to build something very custom and unique. For example, I keep referencing that I built the Demon Slayer. He had a great weapon, but he also has strikes first on it, so it kind of cancels out the strikes last. And then I gave as many
Hmm.
things as possible to give him more attacks. So he just had 6 attacks with his strikes, at initiative 5, great weapon guy, and he just charges into places and he chops things up to bits. But it's important to realize that the army builders, they don't necessarily represent this super well because they're kind of used to being formatted for items where you're just buying an item, buying an item. Whereas with the dwarves, you're actually building items, and each item has its own restrictions. So
Hmm.
you can only have 3 runes at a time on an item. They have to be the same kind of runes because basically, like a weapon gets weapon runes, armor gets armor runes, for example. And
Hmm.
so that's rune of three. Rule of three is they can only have 3 things. You can't have a rune that's not intended for it. So you can't put a banner rune on your sword, right?
Nope.
Um, the rune of pride is basically you can't be exactly identical. So you often see people will have if they want to try to duplicate 2 cannons that both have rune of reloading, one of them will have whatever the next best cheapest rune is just to make them not a duplicate, which gives you a
Yeah.
bit of a
You often see that rune of fire because it's typically like the 5 points of the cheapest possible rune. So that's where you want to have double of the exact same combo, but you can't be the exact same. So the strategy is what's the cheapest possible other rune I can put on this so I can get
yeah.
close to the exact same combo.
Then you can only have the master runes once. So, for example, the master rune of smiting that gives you the d6 damage on a weapon. You can't have 2 kings who both have master runes of smiting on their weapons. So you only have to have
Nope.
one guy that has that. Um, and then duplication. So basically, if you have the asterisk next to it, then it's kind of like extremely common where the same guy or the same weapon can buy the same rune multiple times. For example, there's one that gives you a ward save of 6 up, and then if you buy it again, it gives you a 5 up. Buy it again, it gives you a 4 plus. But you have to buy it like 3 times to do that, right? And then it
Hmm.
becomes a lot of points. So
Hmm.
that's basically how runes work. And what these rules lead to is that you're going to buy runes, and if you look through an army builder, you're going to see just a big list of runes. But actually, you're building a weapon, or building an armor, or building a banner. And so you need to
Hmm.
be thinking about that and think about what piece of things you're trying to do. And all the while, your pool of points is often combined. So other than
Hmm.
the dragon or the demon slayer, your pool is just 125 points for all of that stuff together for the king, for example. And then the demon slayer, it does split it out where the weapon is 100 and the talisman is 25. I don't know why they did
Something like
that.
that.
So instead of giving
I
you the
don't know.
freedom to go all weapon or all defense, it's just all. It's a very specific.
I'm assuming that they were just concerned about someone going too skew in terms of making him too. Maybe they were concerned about too offensive. I'm not exactly sure, but there must have been a
Boring.
reason.
And then they still have single use like other things. Those are mostly for
Hmm.
like the dispel rune, for example.
Hmm. Yep.
So I think the most exciting thing everyone wants to talk about is okay. So what are the weapon runes? Because I want to build a magic sword that just is really cool to me specifically,
Yeah.
and
I'm gonna smash things.
I think they're really exciting. So first off the bat, we've got an incredible pick in particular because the guy who takes this is your king. He can put it on his great weapon, so his great weapon can still have the strength and AP that he normally needs to have to be able to kind of fight anybody, and also
Hmm.
has D6 damage. D6 on your damage
Ooh.
is very unheard of, and it's incredibly swingy because you can get 1 wound through against some kind of triple save monster and then just roll the 6, and it's like, oh, and now you lost combat by like 12 points, and the dragon's running away.
Yeah, it has the again, it is swingy. It's a D6, but it is, in my opinion, absolutely worth it for 75 points because often, even with you have 4 or 5 attacks, to Evan's point, you're fighting something that has those 2 saves or 3 save profiles, or it's a character on a dragon or some other big scary thing. And let me tell you, that character on a dragon is going to be sweating bullets because they'll typically make 2 of those saves or 3 of them, but typically one goes through and it's like, it's a 1 damage, 2 damage. When you're like, oh no, it's D6. Ooh, there's some tense in the room when you roll that dice and you pray to the dwarven lords for that 6. Very powerful, very effective.
So Master Rune of Scalp Blackhammer is like 2+2 wound, and this is the total other side of this. I just told you that like if you're a Slayer, you always wound on a 4+. You already have a rule that helps you with that. And if you're a
Hmm.
king, you could be mounted on shield bearers with your great weapons, so you can be strength 6. And so
Hmm.
most everything in the game, you're going to be wounding on 4s or 3s, right? Unless you're
Hmm.
fighting an Iron Demon, this is not going to do very much in terms of affecting you. So paying that many points for your only Master Rune to go to something that only helps some of the time is just why some people just don't do that. And instead, they're just going to
Yeah.
say, "I'll just try to hurt you," and if I can't hurt you, then I'll have combat res from my big brick of guys, and they'll help me win anyway.
I think this is more relevant when you were taking hand weapons, but because you could just take a great weapon and put runes on top of that, suddenly the relevance of this is a lot less, and it's hard to justify the points.
Also, this thing would be amazing if it was like 35 points. Then
Oh,
you could buy the hand weapon
yeah.
and shield, have the better armor, and then buy this so that you can still just always throw out a couple decent wounds. Right? That's
Hmm.
pretty good. But it's 65, which is just too many for what that's doing. Um, and again, it's not just about how many points an individual rune is going to cost you. It's also the opportunity cost of what if you not buy because of this, especially when it's a master rune. It's already opportunity cost of not getting any other master rune, right? And
Yep.
then all the your points allotment going away. Because even at
Hmm.
125 points, we were talking that up a while ago. But the problem with that is that a lot of these runes, you're actually paying a bit of a premium for these effects because you get to customize it. Because you're picking
Yep.
everything, it's a little bit more expensive than it would be if they gave you a book, an item out of the book that just had that combination of rules.
Yep. So it allows you to give you exactly what you want.
Yeah. Alaric the Mad's really, really cool because this one is no armor saves against it, and very often
Hmm.
there are people in this game who have 2+ armor save. If you're hitting dwarfs, maybe they have a re-rollable 2+ armor save. So saying I don't care how good it is, you don't have a save, and especially when you combine this with like a Slayer who automatically wins on a 4+, right? So if you don't need strength from a great weapon and you have Rune Alaric the Mad, now that's a pretty interesting combo. So you can have the hand weapon Slayer, charge in there with the no armor saves and go at your pretty decent initiative and actually fight before somebody else for once as a dwarf.
Hmm.
It's pretty good.
Yep.
I see this is really common on like the Doomslayer guys.
Yeah.
And then you have you start getting excited because it's like Rune of Dragon Slaying. Oh, cool. What does this do? Oh, you just wound on a 2+ against a behemoth.
Yeah,
Why?
I really was hoping for a monstrous killing blow, weren't you, when you
And
read that?
you know what? We want to know why it's not there. Why is there no rune that gives you Monster Slayer? Because Ungrim has it.
Because sadness, that's my answer.
No, it's because Ungrim has Monster Slayer and they don't want anyone else to have it.
Well, he needs to learn how to share, but I guess dwarves are not good about with sharing
But
either.
Bretonia has a virtue that gives you Monster Slayer, and it has a character who has Monster Slayer. Bretonia has both, but dwarves don't get to have
You,
both.
you would think if there's an army that would have more monster slayers because they don't have any monsters, it would be the dwarves, but
Absolutely, I think so.
nope.
I think so.
Sadness.
Um, I'm just gonna not read Master in a Flight. Don't waste your time.
Yeah, let's move on. Yeah.
So I really like Master in a Witness, which is you get strikes first. And what's really cool about
Hmm.
this is you combine that with either having the great weapon or what, and you just actually have a decent initiative on your attacks. So
Hmm.
my build was Master in a Swiftness on my great weapon, and then as many things as possible to give me more attacks. We'll get to see some more of those later. Um,
Yeah. And again, you're probably going to get charged first because you're still the dwarf army going slower. But and I know I said earlier that hey, typically most combats only last one round. But if there's one army that typically is going to last more than one round in a fight, typically 2 or 3 rounds, it is the dwarf army. So while it might not be super applicable the first round of combat, it absolutely is going to be huge in the second and third round of combat with your dwarf lords.
Okay, so now we find all the runes that go on. So basically, that's your master rune. And very often, what you do is you
Mhm.
pick one master rune first, and then you buy the extra upgrades on top of it. So, again, just to cover it real fast, it's either smiting when you want to do damage, Alaric the Mad when you want to just have armor piercing. Now, uh, having no armor saves against your attacks is something that's really, really good against things like heavy cavalry, which means
Mhm.
it's very good if you have that on something like either shooting attacks or somebody who's fast and mobile or ambushes or is able to kind of skirmish around and go, oh, look, a bunch of Chaos Knights. Let me kill them all, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Or you have Swiftness, which, strikes first. I think that's potentially really worth it. Turns your dwarf
Mhm.
into an elf. And then what do you buy on top of that? Okay, so with the rest of your points, you can have Rune of Parrying, so -1 to hit. That's pretty good. I mean, when you have high weapon skill, being harder to hit is great. It's only 35
Yeah, at
points.
the same time, you're already really durable as a dwarf. I mean, again, if you're going for a defensive build, not a bad strategy.
Well, okay, if you're going to try to take a Demon Slayer, for example, and you want to not just die to the first combat after you fail to kill something, Rune of Parrying
Hmm.
is one of the only ways you can potentially do that.
Yeah, well, it makes a big difference because again, in this game, there's a lot less dice being thrown out there and a lot less things that have rerolls. So it is effective. So it just depends on. I think this is less relevant on the king that has more armor inherently, and certainly on the slayers, it has a lot more potential.
So, Banishment For a long time, everyone was talking about how the Rune of Banishment was hilarious because as soon as you put any rune on your weapon, you have magical attacks, and every demon in the game didn't get a ward save against magical attacks anymore. But
Hmm.
now, who's laughing now? Not us, because we play with the Legacy Errata changes where demons get to have their ward save all the time, unless if you have the Rune of Banishment, which says warp spawned
Hmm.
characters don't or models don't get to have the ward save. So I mean, again, but and this is something that's a thematic thing, right? Where you're gonna say, hey, maybe I have a friend who plays demons, and it just feels right to take this. In fact, my Demon Slayer, I did buy this on him because I knew I was playing Demons of Chaos, and I just thought it would be a fun little vibe to have a guy with this item on it. But like normally, you can't in a tournament scenario predict who you're gonna play against. So buying things that are good against
Hmm.
one faction is not worth it.
Yeah.
It's
And
still
to be
cool.
fair, there's just not that many demons out there currently at the moment. But I am hopeful that we will see more demon love in the future from the old world team, and hopefully this will become more and more relevant over time.
So Rune of Fury, I really like this. Plus one attack, 25 points. If you have the 25 points, this is almost always worth it. If your king had 200 points of runes and you could buy as many of these as possible, I would probably buy like 7.
And there's an asterisk next to it. And what does that mean, Evan?
It means you can buy them at more than once, but you still can only get 3 runes
Ooh.
on a weapon. So you could get a great weapon and give it 3 extra attacks for 75 points. So you could have a
Hmm.
king with a great weapon with 7 attacks. And everyone's like,
Yep.
well, that sounds really good. Why would I do that? Well, normally it's because you want to have that rune of smiting instead.
Hmm.
Because it's 3 more attacks from 4 to 7 is an improvement of 75%, right, over your normal.
Yep.
But being able to do d6 damage is an improvement of like 400%
Hmm.
against multi-wound models.
Yep. All right. Grudge rune.
Uh, Terrible. Anyway, Rune of Might gives
Moving
you
on.
plus 1 strength.
Hmm.
Fine.
Hmm.
But like,
Good. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's fine. And you can do it multiple
Yeah.
times.
Yep.
And Runic Cleaving.
Hmm.
So this one is really sad because it gives you AP1 and it's only for hand weapons. But a hand weapon normally has Gromroll weapons, which gives you AP1. So you have to pay 15 points to get the thing back that you already had before.
Yeah. If it had stacked with that, it would be great, but it doesn't. So
If it had
yeah.
stacked with it,
Uh,
it would actually you'd actually see magic hand weapons. But because it doesn't, buying this to
yep.
just try to get so it's 15-point tax to try to use a hand weapon as a magic item.
And it's just too expensive of a tax. If it was 5 points, okay, no problem.
Or if you could just put
15.
on your great weapon magic weapons, because AP3 is my new favorite thing. It's amazing.
AP3 is amazing. Yep, but you can't. So let's move on.
Yeah. Striking is plus 1 to your weapon skill. I think this is also really, really good because weapon skill breakpoints are huge in this game, and they're very commonly 1 pip away. When you have an ogre tyrant who's weapon skill 6 and he's fighting an elf with weapon skill 7, you are like,
Hmm.
oh my god, I hate my life for being 1 lower than you. So being 1 higher
Hmm.
than somebody when you're a lord level character is very often all you need.
Yeah, 15 points to say my dwarf lord is weapon skill 8 to almost anything in the game is weapon skill 7 at most, and I hit you on threes now makes a big difference.
Yeah. If
Especially if you then have hatred, you can re-roll it. Your efficiency of getting those attacks through goes up substantially at that
So,
point.
like, potentially on your Demon Slayer build, you either buy Rune of Striking or you buy whatever tattoo it is that gives you the reroll to hit in a challenge. So that either way,
Hmm.
you have a good chance of hitting either 3 plus to hit or a 4 plus rerolling, right?
Hmm.
Rune of Fire gives you flaming attacks, but you already have a Runesmith in your unit, so you already had flaming attacks, and you don't even want flaming attacks. And Rune of Speed gives you plus 1 initiative. Oh, I did buy one of these, I think, too, because I think I had the Master Rune, Rune of Fury, and this, so that I would have
You must
initiative
have had
6.
some sort of speed increase to go first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because if you don't have the third rune, for 5 points, giving you just a little bit higher initiative is often also all you need. And it's just like weapon skill. There's very often a breakpoint of just 1 or 2 pips where I now go
Hmm.
before you. And so buying those little pips so that you're suddenly above the other person, when you do that math, is like
Hmm.
can swing those engagements. So if you do have 5 points, you haven't bought a third rune yet, why not?
Not bad for 5 points.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, moving on.
Yeah, so you have pretty much in here the ability to buy like that monster that multi wound guy weapon. You've got somebody who can hit
Hmm.
everything in the universe, and then you've got a lot of attacks, and you've got that's pretty much it. That's kind of your 3 different ideas you can do with some combinations in here. So armor runes.
Hmm.
Um, these ones are a bit more like you just buy one or zero.
Typically,
Yeah,
yeah.
because for example, Master Rune Adamant that gives you toughness 10 is kind of all or nothing. Like on the King, you're not going to have very much left
Ooh,
after that. Um,
100 points.
it is 100 points, but being toughness 10 means you cannot be wounded by anyone who is strength 4 or lower. They
Yeah.
cannot hurt you
Hmm.
at all.
Yep. It is. It is. You want to say all in on defense. This is the way to go all in on defense.
Yeah, and the Ogre Blade Chaos Lord, who already improved his strength by 1 by
Hmm.
rolling a 6 on the Gaze of the Gods, he wounds you on a 6 plus.
Hmm. He's not going to get many of
And he
those through.
charges you with his 7 attacks and fails to hurt you at all.
It totally happens a lot. Yep.
Yeah. So it's no secret amongst the dwarf players that this is very often put on your anvil because the anvil's sitting out in the breeze, totally defenseless because you didn't take any other units that can guard it, and now this thing is
Hmm.
unkillable because it's unbreakable and it's toughness 10. And you try to shoot it with anything that isn't a great cannon, it can't get hurt by it. Like for example, Fireball cannot wound it. Viletide
Yeah.
cannot wound it.
And again, there are things that can kill it, but it is incredibly difficult, and there are not many things in the game. And again, this is when it becomes that distraction anvil in terms of, yeah, go ahead, try and kill it, because the odds of you succeeding are so low.
Yeah, I don't prefer to play that way, but that's something that people do. Early on in
Hmm.
the edition, it was okay. I'm going to take a king and buy this, and then just give the king the great weapon, and he'll just swing a regular attacks at you while you're just
Hmm.
unable to hurt him. I don't think that
Hmm.
goes too well. I think that it's a lot of points to make your king unkillable, but wouldn't you rather just hurt stuff? And you have to get victory points somehow.
It's the same problem you're going to have as soon as you put this 100 point unkillable wound on your king in the big brick unit. Okay, I'm just going to go kill everything else in your army and win by 100 points and just
Yeah,
ignore this king because it's just not worth trying to kill him. He's just so freaking hard to kill. I'm just not even going to try.
and just to be clear, it's not your opponent's fault that you made your very slow unit of infantry so unengageable that their correct play is to avoid it at all costs and go everywhere else. That's not
Yep.
their fault. That's in some ways your fault. So if you as the dwarf player say, "Oh man, this is so much fun. I can make my guys incredibly immune to damage. This one unit can slowly walk across the table, and if anyone charges me, my hammers will hit them with 2 attacks. We all have ward saves. They don't get any charge bonuses, and the king, he's tough as 10." It's not their fault that they say, "Wow, I'm going to go everywhere else in the universe and not touch this." That's not their fault.
Yep.
That's your fault because dwarves absolutely have the ability to make a Death Star that is so unengageably hard to damage that people will have to go everywhere else and not touch it.
Yep.
So, you've got a Master Room of Grommel to give you a 2 plus armor save. Almost all your characters can get 3 plus anyway, but this
Hmm.
does give you a 2 plus when you're still using your Great Weapon. So potentially you can buy this and still have a Great Weapon guy so that he's still, able to get a good armor save while having that. In particular, when you have like your reroll ones, because you're still gonna have reroll one on your armor save even if you have magic armor, right?
Hmm.
It's pretty cool.
Yep.
Definitely
Very cool.
a bit cheaper of a way to make a king durable is to do that.
Hmm.
Plus 1 wound, man, that's pretty nice to do. Nobody does, but that's pretty
It
cool.
is,
I
and they
like
have
that.
this in a lot of the armies. There's multiple armies from vampires to chaos to dwarves and others have +1 wound, um, and we almost never see it taken. And it just, I just think it's the price point. I think they priced them all at that 30-35 plus range, and it's just too steep. I think if it was priced at, 15 points, we would see people take it all the time. 20-25, okay, hit or miss. But as soon as you start hitting that 30 plus range for a single wound, even though I'm sure some mathematical calculator somewhere says this is totally appropriate for what you get out of it and your survivability, yada yada. But the reality is, I never see people take this. And there's so many events that we have run, so many different players, they're just points too high. They're just cost too high. I
So
think they
your
should lower the points for them.
so your shield bearers, which give you attacks and wounds, gives you 3
Hmm.
wounds for 60 points, so 20 points a
Hmm.
wound.
Yep. 35 is just far, far too high. And again, we see this with the other armies that could take plus
Yeah.
1 wounds to their characters as well. Same problem.
So Ring of Fortitude is pretty cool because it's a +1 toughness, and you can take it multiple times. So
Hmm.
obviously taking it 3 times makes your toughness 5 character toughness 8, which is not as good as Rune of Adamant, right? But you're not going to take it 3 times. You could just take it 1 time, to be toughness 6 on your king, for example. That's pretty cool.
Hmm.
Toughness 5
Hmm.
is often a bit of a sad breakpoint because there's a lot of things that are strength 7 in the game that all that toughness went to waste, right? When you're being hit by dragon ogres or Bretonnian Duke with a Ogre Blade, they're often and the Chaos
Hmm.
Lord with the Ogre Blade, they're strength 7. So if you just make yourself toughness 6, then you have your toughness kind of matters, right? It is 30 points though. And again, it's like, well, then why don't I just be toughness 10? And then if I'm toughness 10, why don't they just not fight me? And
Yep, it's a slippery slope.
right. On the other hand, though, what almost always shows up is Rune of Preservation, which is not a master rune, even though I think Rune of Preservation should potentially be a master rune because it is incredibly useful.
No, it's fine the way it is. Let the dwarves have their runes.
Well, I'm just saying their intention was master runes are the strongest ones that we don't want that many people to have. But this one is the strongest one that is, in theory, not supposed to be everywhere. But it is very, very good because it makes you immune to Killing Blow and multiple wounds. Most things only
Huge.
do one of those two things, and this one does both for less points. Like Empire has like a 40-point heavy armor set that makes you immune to Killing Blow only.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, this is a way to it's definitely makes you significantly more durable, but not so much your T10 where the opponent runs away from you. So you'll see a whole bunch of that king on that shield bearer with a whole bunch of offensive output, and then this is only 25 points. It's like, okay, Mister, Ogre Blade, Chaos Lord, go ahead and charge me, or whatever. You're still only going to do one wound per that goes through, and typically, okay, you're going to do one or two or three, maybe. I'm still alive on my shield bearer. I'm going to hit you back and it's going to really hurt with my d6 damage. So
Exactly,
we see this
because
combo a
there's
lot.
no character mounted on a dragon in the game who can be immune to multi wounds. That's not a thing. So you
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
6 wounds on foot, quote unquote, and immune to multi
Hmm.
wounds. Whereas you're fighting against a guy who potentially, let's say he has an ogre blade. Now he's not doing on average 2 wounds to you with his D3. He's only doing 1 wound each time. Where you're still doing the D6 against him. So not only do you have the D6 and he has the D3, but you're immune to multi wounds that he's not.
Yep. It's huge. Yep. So we
So
see this a
this is
lot.
also just meta because a ton of high level armies in the game just buy an ogre blade on their guy. That's also one of the
Hmm.
reasons why it's meta. I very often have switched to buying Killing Blow on my guys because I really like decapitating Bretonnian Dukes and making them die in one hit when they are not immune to it. But it won't work on this guy because he's immune to both, which is very strong. And I don't see how you can bring a king and not buy it. It's just too good.
Yeah. These are rare. Very few of these in the game.
So Rune of Shielding is a bit of a weird one because it gives you the 6-up ward and then it can be stacked up to 3 times
Hmm.
to give you the 4-up ward. So for 45 points, you can have the 4+ ward save. That's pretty good, but and honestly, I think you'd see this all the time if it wasn't for the fact that there's the banner that gives the whole unit a 5+ ward save, and they very often dwarf players will just buy the Rune Grungni banner and stick that guy
Hmm.
in the same unit as the Thane, who now
Hmm.
doesn't have a ward save, but he doesn't need one.
Yep. See it a lot.
And then Rune of Stone's real and armor save roll. Again, this is only 5 points. And when you have a 2+ armor save or a 3+ armor save base, like, I don't know. I think that's, like, if you just have 5 points, I don't think you should not buy it. Now, whether you remember to use it during the game or not, it's totally up to you because you might just forget that this even exists.
Yeah, sometimes if you have one of those special one-offs, you really need to make yourself a token or some sort of big rune stone that you put in the center of the table so you will remember and then you still forget. But
Yeah.
definitely some fun ways for some fun thematic tokens.
So there's basically just 3 types of armor you build here. You either do everything as Rune of Adamant, that's it. You do
Hmm.
Rune of Preservation and maybe one other thing, but mostly that's it. Or you do
Pretty much.
3 runes of shielding and you have a 4-up ward save. Those are your 3 options.
Yep, see those all the time.
Yeah. All right, so talisman runes. You're like, wait, we're still going? Yeah, because they
Yeah,
have.
but wait, there's more.
I know, and there's other ways to defend yourself, and this is one of the reasons why the armor runes aren't necessarily like a big combo piece because you don't need 3 things to make a really good piece of armor. You do need 3 runes to make a good weapon. You need 3 effects because none of those runes that are weapon runes kind of do multiple things at once. They don't give you AP and attacks or anything like that. So, but on defense, you kind of get all you need in 1 or 2 separate things. Maybe 1 armor rune, 1 talisman rune, something like that. And so, what are these
Hmm.
ones? There's a there's a power level spell that you can cast to make it so that you can
Just,
get harder for people to get spells off.
just don't bother. Let's move on. It's power level
Ah, it's
2, which means it
awful.
will be dispelled instantly by any level 4 out there.
Yeah, it sucks. That's awful. I mean, and it's
Yep.
basically it's 50 points to be able to cast the calming magic spell from high magic that is just bad. So
Hmm. Yep. Doesn't make sense.
rolling an extra d6 when you do your dispel is not as good as just automatically dispelling. But I
Yep.
guess you get to do it every time. So I mean that's pretty cool. Or no, no wait, this is it's once per turn.
No,
So
it's one.
it's
Yeah, once per turn is good. Yeah.
it's a once per turn dispel scroll on your level 2 guy. Because the Anvil of Doom, if he has this, it's very easy for people just to stay out of your dispel range. So
Yep.
don't do that. And then if you're taking on
Yep.
your Rune Lord, then you're not taking your Anvil because you can't fit that in there anymore. And if
Yeah.
you're taking a Rune
You're still
Smith,
going to have the range. You're going to have the range problem still with these because
right?
again, you're moving slower. The enemy wizards are just going to. All right, I'm going to stay 1 inch out of your dispel range, and it's pretty easy to do when you're much faster than your opponent.
And pretty much the only viable guy is you have the Rune Smith, who's a level 1, who now has a Dispel Scroll on each of his on one roll a turn. But Dispel Scroll on a level 1 is about as good as like having just a level 4 without it.
Yep, exactly right. Just doesn't make sense, the math.
Yeah, and instead you can just take Rune of Spellbreaking and just automatically
Hmm.
dispel, and you don't have to do any rolls. You don't have to, and
Hmm.
you're not spending. You're going to spend these, like you could spend the Master Rune of Balance points on your character, and then try to use it all game and never be able to extra dispel anything. Because even if you use the third dice, because you're still in range, you still don't roll high enough on the extra dice, or maybe you like freaking I don't know. Can they miscast? I don't think
You
they can.
spent you're spending a lot of points for a chance.
Whereas the Rune of Spellbreaking is a guarantee, and
Yep.
that's incredibly good, especially when it's going to be Miasma Barrage on the big unit or something,
Hmm.
or it's getting rid of a column crystal. So
Yep.
just do that.
Yep.
Um, Rune of Warding, 2+ ward against a single wound. Now, a lot of the characters in the dwarf list they don't often have enough points for this, but I take these. Their opal amulets are the same thing in high elves. It's incredibly good, so good.
Hmm.
Especially because you're often getting hit by a cannonball or a monster slayer hit or something like that, and you're gonna die. And I think the reason why the dwarves don't love this as much is because they take Rune of Preservation instead, and then
Hmm.
they're fine, right?
It's still good. Yep.
And then Rune of the Furnace is something that comes up all the time because 3+ word save against flaming is one of those things that makes everyone who has flaming attacks go, oh god, I wish I didn't have flaming attacks. And it's
Hmm.
only 5 points.
5 points.
And you know what has flaming attacks? Pillars of Fire and Fireballs.
Hmm.
You know what people take a lot of? Those two things.
Yep.
So just having a word save versus flaming is like great.
Very much so. And it's a 3+ ward save. Again, it's not applicable versus too many things, but those pillars of fires and fireballs are very common. So for 5 points, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. And then you have Rune of Passage, which is move through cover. Again, only 5 points, and it's on you and your whole unit. If you have a Demon Slayer, you pretty much have to buy this because
Hmm.
if you like go down from 3 to 2 inch move because you're just charged through a forest, you're like
You're not going anywhere.
you could be 4 inches from an enemy unit and fail a charge.
Yep, that happens.
So dope. Probably if you're running a Demon Slayer around by himself and he actually wants to fight anybody, I would buy Rune of Passage. But otherwise, you buy this on like your king because you want your unit to have the
Hmm.
move through cover. Because again, going from the 3 inch move to 2 inches is terrible.
Yeah, pretty bad.
Yeah, move through cover matters a lot more when your movement value is low. We'll
All right,
cover
I think
standard
we're on to the
runes
last
in part
runes,
2 because
right?
it's kind of for units, right? I mean, the only thing to talk about is basically the BSB and what he's going to buy. But that's pretty
Hmm.
much just Master Rune Grungni because it's so good. You're just going to have to buy it pretty much every time.
So let's talk about that one then.
Yeah, so the BSB only, right? So
Hmm.
he's the one who has to buy it.
Hmm.
This guy and the whole unit he joins has the 5+ ward save all the time, and everyone within 6 inches, which very often doesn't come up because the units are too spread out on the table, can have the six
Hmm.
plus ward save during the shooting phase. So that doesn't come up very often because it's not within range of the unit, it's within range of the model, and if your unit's kind of big, it's hard to have other units nearby. It's also only a 6+. But the main thing is I can take that one Death Star unit that my king's sitting in, and I can give that whole unit and all those guys in it the 5+ ward save.
Hmm.
So the
Yep.
rules that were written for this book quintuple down on make one incredibly difficult brick to kill, and that's it.
Yeah, but again, that's also a choice to field them that way. You can still make multiple very hard bricks to
Yes.
kill. You don't have to make them all unkillable bricks. And I think that's the kind of the trap that we've seen in other armies where you're double, tripling down on that one character, putting all your eggs in one basket, and then again, it will surprise and totally destroy an opponent who's caught off guard. But once you have veteran players who know how to play the game, the trick's not going to work anymore. And again, as soon as we start going to more and more objective play, which I think is more and more the future of this game, it's going to become less and less effective. So there are lots of ways to really double, triple down on a single crushing math powerful unit, but the reality is, you really need to spread that out, and you're going to see that Death Star unit become less and less applicable, I believe, over time as the meta keeps evolving.
Absolutely. And I
All
hope
right.
so because just to be honest, like having a Death Star or playing against it can feel very monotone.
Yep. Just reduces the fun factor, quite honestly, for both players.
And it's all being skewed by I want to make sure that the victory points are not going to go up because you're not going to be able to kill this one brick. So it's because of the victory point rules, you are massively incentivized to make one brick unkillable and just walk that thing
Hmm.
around. And whether it kills stuff or not, it's fine. It definitely doesn't die. That's the idea.
Yep, for now, but as soon as you start playing scenarios where that's not the only scoring or it's less important for scoring, things change. All right,
Absolutely.
so we'll cover the rest of these rune standards in part two when we talk about the rest of the units, right? So we'll cover them then. What else do we have though?
And yeah, so it'll be the other runic standards. There's engineering runes that we're going to cover in part two, talking about how you can put those on the artillery, and then your units. Because again, we just talked about the characters, and the characters are in dwarves more so than any other faction. I think a big part of buffing up your unit and making them interesting.
Hmm. Cool, we did it. Did we get to the end
Yes,
of part one?
yes. End of part
We did
one.
it. All right, wonderful. Well, if you made it this far, please do like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you on part two of covering the Dwarf Army review. Evan, any last words, sir?
Just that you have to stay legendary.
All right, we'll see you all next time.